Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of DeFi Revelations. If you have not tuned in before, my name's Kirk, and I'm the head of business development with Revelo Intel. Really excited conversation today with Beachball from Synonym Finance. For anybody that's not aware of Synonym Finance, they are a cross-chain lending platform, and I'm really excited about the way that they're thinking about onboarding exotic assets like GMXLP tokens, for example, unlocking use cases where you can borrow on the EVM and then or lend on the EVM and then borrow on Solana, for example. So we touch on all of that in the episode. So if you like the episode, definitely encourage you to like and subscribe. To the YouTube channel. And then you should also take a look at revelointel.com, where we've got a lot of content on Synonym that'll be coming out for free for your use. So we appreciate it, and hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of DeFi Revelations. Today we've got Beachball, a core contributor for Synonym Finance, on the call. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Super excited to dig into Synonym and the cross-chain lending product that you guys have built, and kind of peeling the layers back and getting more information. But before we do that, definitely want to dive into yourself a little bit. Maybe tell us how you got into crypto, what your background was before that. And then, importantly, I guess, why did you guys decide to build Synonym at the end of the day?
Yeah, for sure. My background before getting into crypto, you know, I I first got interested in crypto back when I was not old enough to legally send a wire transfer to Japan to buy Bitcoins on Mt. Gox. So there was a really early kind of discovery period, and then years went by. I was in school, got busy with a lot of different things in life, and kind of got back in touch with the space closer to DeFi summer and got really interested in what was going on with, first of all, on-chain basically yields, CDPs, the progress maker was making early on. That's what kind of got me back into things. Before I made the jump full-time into crypto, I was working at a general VC fund. So I spent a lot of time on the investment side on a lot of different industries. And then basically I started contributing to a couple different DAOs just as like a very kind of
Hmm.
entry tier contributor. I started with Notional Finance, which was or still is a
Oh yeah.
fixed rate lending protocol that's on a ton of different chains now. Really interesting, big, complex code base there and great team. And then as time went on, I started getting into the more meme and BD and marketing side with Jones DAO. Love that team. And then I also ended up doing about a year long stint as BD role within Layer Zero. So as time went on, I kind of covered a lot of different bases and then had the opportunity to work with a team to make Synonym happen. And as soon as I had that opportunity, I figured, I spent all of my time thinking about crypto and DeFi. I might as well just make the full time jump. So that's how I got into it. As far as why we built Synonym, I think it comes down to a couple things. First and foremost, I think that there's a lot of fantastic lending and leverage and borrowing products out there already. However, none of them felt like they had taken a step forward in quite some time. I think we're feeling some sort of stagnation in the money market space, and we wanted to see kind of a step change improvement in what was there. And then the second thing is it's a product that I've personally wanted for a long time. Up until now, I've kind of become an arbitrum maxi, whether or not that's a result of Jones DAO. Who knows? I've wanted the ability to keep my assets where I want to keep them, but get active on other chains and kind of act on these more like destination chain opportunities from where I am. So that turned out that was a need that a lot of other users wanted and that resonated with them. And that kind of pushed us over the edge to actually building this thing and making it happen.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about too that I know you had mentioned to me previously was kind of like the relationship with New Order DAO. Maybe touch on that a little bit and like the origin story behind like the merger that you guys went through.
For sure. Yeah. So New Order was an incubation DAO that was focused on kind of building at the edge of DeFi and backing really interesting teams. They were responsible for incubating products like Redacted, which is now Dinero,
Mhm.
and they had some amazing talent within their circles and the protocols that they helped build up. As time went on, it started to become clear that there are a few pitfalls with an incubation DAO. Operationally and legally, it is difficult to scale and then distribute the value to like strictly on-chain participants, right? Like if you have
Yeah.
a Series A or a SAFT token document, it's kind of hard to make that available to anonymous,
Yeah. How do you sign it?
token holders, right? Like how do you make that even work, right? So,
Right.
um, you know, standard basic things like that and a couple other issues made it clear that maybe there was an opportunity to pivot that DAO and merge it into something else and create more value for stakeholders that way. I got in touch with the New Order team just by chance, just by some mutual connections. And I ended up doing some research for them. And then the merger opportunity came up. And then I got involved with kind of working with that team through the merger. And here we are with Syno.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, no, it was funny when you mentioned it to me because I was familiar with New Order DAO previously as well, and I love the idea of it. You know what I mean? But obviously, like you said, the execution of it is kind of difficult. But I love that idea of kind of just like an on-chain like venture studio almost, right, where you can get
Yeah.
exposure to all these early stage projects. But yeah, I mean, total Chads, tons of talent, like you said, within that organization. So it's awesome to see that they're still kicking behind the scenes of Synonym as well. So I guess pivoting into Synonym a little bit, you mentioned, in your intro that you had done some BD work for Layer Zero, obviously in the past. You have that background with Layer Zero, but you guys chose to build, Synonym on Wormhole, architecture. Maybe take us through that decision-making process and like, what do you guys like about Wormhole that made it like the right fit for you guys?
Yeah, great question. I think when you look at all of the available cross-chain stacks that are out there, they all have their unique advantages and trade-offs. I don't think there is any purely right answer for every single builder. A ton of respect for the Layer Zero team, obviously, but I think what made us choose Wormhole was generally the wide suite of products that are available within that stack. So you have generalized messaging, you have the most widely used token bridge, like traditionally built token bridge in the space. You've got NTT, which is their version of Layer Zero's OFT. You've got wormhole queries, which are a great way to pull on chain data in a pinch from basically any location. And then you've got out of the box automatic relayers in there, built into their messaging product. So for us, we basically saw everything was there that we needed from day one to get this thing built. Synonym is a very complex product, and having kind of that full toolkit available to us was valuable. One thing we talk a lot about within Synonym and within the team is the difference between building with generalized messaging in mind, where you're basically just minting and burning tokens on kind of a unified set of contracts on either end versus using a token bridge in the middle, which can be a bit slower and is obviously prone to different weaknesses. At the end of the day, we just found it useful to have both available, just in case.
Right.
We want to build some pretty exotic lending products out there with pretty exotic assets. So having everything available to us was really valuable. And then the other side of it is kind of just like the support and the community side. Wormhole has been really great to build with. Their engineering team has been extremely supportive. They help us out on really complicated tasks during builds, and the community has been great so far. So, a few different reasons, but that's probably the best I can boil it down.
Sure, sure. And I guess just sticking I guess to the architecture, bit of it for a second as well. So, I was reading through your documentation and you guys go into some detail on like you guys chose the hub and spoke model, versus
Mhm.
the point to point, I think is what it's called. What are the trade-offs there? Or like why did you guys decide that the hub and spoke was the way to go versus some of the other models out there?
Yeah, so we went for the hub and spoke architecture primarily due to security and stability reasons. Having a hub and spoke allows us to avoid things like interest rate desync. Because basically, if you're using a point-to-point model and you're tracking an increasingly large number of assets paired against each other within a DeFi application, the number of interest rate pairs that you need to track over time will grow exponentially. And if there's a desync in the tracking of rates between each point, then the protocol could end up with bad debt. The whole thing could just kind of break, right, and just refuse to work. And then that obviously poses security risks at the end of the day, for the protocol and the DAO overall. So a hub and spoke model basically allows us to just track all pairs, balances, and states in one
Hmm.
spot, which makes us a lot more comfortable, helps us sleep at night when it comes to the stability of the platform. I will say that one downside to that is speed.
Yeah.
Right now, when a user initiates a transaction that comes from a remote spoke to our hub, which lives on Arbitrum, there is, travel time, right? The message needs to be finalized. We await full finality for security reasons right now. And so there's some time required to get that done. We are close to shipping an upgrade that will reduce that wait time to basically nothing up to a certain transaction size limit. But obviously we're being very careful, auditing it like crazy, and hoping to get that out later on.
Pair Protocol is the first and only trading platform for narrative trading. Their technology unlocks the ability for anyone to pair trade. For example, if you think ETH will outperform Cardano, you can long ETH ADA in one click with leverage. Or perhaps you think Pepe will continue to outperform Doge. You can long Pepe Doge. Again, all in one transaction. The combinations are endless. Learn more at beta.pair.garden. Awesome. Yeah, that was on my question list as well, because I thought it said something like it could take up to like 20 minutes, if depending on like what chain you're trying to originate on, if it's not Arbitrum, right? But I'm assuming if you're originating from Arbitrum to, one of the spoke chains, I'm assuming that you don't have that same problem. Is that accurate? Like you're a little bit quicker if you're originating from Arbitrum, or
Yeah, if like let's say you're processing a deposit, right, and you want to put in wrap staked ETH Arbitrum collateral, right, and you put it in on Arbitrum, it's going to go in right away because there's no cross chain messaging time. But if you're requesting a withdraw on Scroll and you had processed an initial borrow between Arbitrum and Optimism, there's going to be a bit of a wait time there because you're completing a few kind of cross chain hops, but yeah, with optimistic finality coming down the pipe, we'll basically be able to kind of front you your assets on any destination up to a certain dollar amount. And, we would bear the finality risk there. And then UX wise, you're not waiting at all for those cross chain messages to happen. Again, this is obviously up to a certain dollar amount. We're not going to front millions, at least to start.
yeah.
But as time goes on, we can increase those limits and make the UX better wherever we can. So,
Gotcha. So, obviously cross-chain lending, and certainly probably when you guys started building, Synonym, right? Like it was, there was not a lot of great development going on, in that sector. I think since then, obviously we've seen things like, Tapioca, has come out. Obviously they're dealing with some issues and they have to relaunch. But how do you guys feel about the competition level in the space? I mean, and ultimately, I guess, thinking into the future, I mean, do you think it will be like one killer app kind of like eats the entire cross chain lending market, or do you think that there's enough room for, for competition, essentially at the end of the day?
yeah. So, I mean, right now, I kind of look at competition as we've got the big incumbents, the Aves,
Yeah.
the compounds of the world, flanked closely by teams like Radiant, which have done
Yeah.
a great
Radiant.
job in scaling up their markets. And then, yeah, to your point, Tapioca, Tapioca is definitely in the same sphere, kind of same competitive space as us. But I think that they're slightly different in that at least I see them more as like an omni-chain CDP. And when
Hmm.
users come there, they may not be looking for the exact same like UX or flow or outcome as they are with us, which is more familiar as like a lending market. Like it feels like Aave on
Right.
top, but under the hood, it's very different. We're probably competing more with like the radiance of the world right now. As far as how the space progresses, I think that there's always going to be room for different lending markets because there's ultimately going to be a gradient of how different protocols and teams deal with listing different assets and then deal with the risks of those assets. I'm not trying to paint the picture that we're some like Wild West will list literally anything with a token address kind of team. We're very careful in what we do, but I think
Yeah.
there's going to be teams that kind of build for users that want a little bit more than like borrowing, USDC and ETH
Yeah.
and, want like a little something more. And so I think that'll always persist in the space. And I think we'll try to kind of stay in that area for as long as we can.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point too, and that's where my mind goes as well when I think about like the competition and not just cross chain lending, but just like the lending markets in general. It's always balancing like the risks versus the fact that obviously users want access to all of these exotic markets. Like I think you guys have some of the GM tokens right from GMX
Mm-hmm.
available on your platform, which is great to see. You know what I mean? We need more of that, but it's almost like in my mind at least, whoever can kind of like while balancing risk, obviously, but whoever can onboard more and more of these exotic assets that people want are the ones I think that are going to end up having a little bit of an edge on their competitors because there's only so many people that can, in my mind at least, like if I have ETH or Bitcoin, or even some stables, and I want to go supply it somewhere, like Aave is just so entrenched in that
Mm-hmm.
if other lending markets are purely focused on competing in those arenas, I don't think that it's gonna work very well, right? They're just very very entrenched, with those
Yeah.
markets. So kind of going out further on the risk curve is almost a requirement, in my opinion, for some lending protocols that want to obviously earn market share and users and so on and so forth. But we mentioned the risk part of it, right? So you guys mentioned that you're you know obviously he's trying to remain somewhat risk averse. What kind of like models do you guys have in place to, I guess, assess the risks and set the parameters of the lending and the borrowing when they come on to Synonym? Like, are you guys involved with any of the, I think the typical names, right? Like Gauntlet or Chaos Labs or, some of these risk assessors to help you, and the team setting those parameters?
Yeah, so we've had the opportunity to work with Gauntlet since before our markets launched. They've been with us basically the whole time, and we've kind of built a process with them and used their risk frameworks when it comes to evaluating the potential of any new asset. We very rigorously evaluate the available on-chain liquidity conditions, which for us is like actually a lot more complicated of a task than it already sounds like because if we're looking at listing an asset, we need to evaluate its presence on every single chain. If it's a natively cross-chain asset, something like a TBTC threshold BTC that was recently added, we've got millions in deposits in that. But if it comes to liquidating a user's position in that, we need to make sure that we can do that on any chain that they may have borrowed to or from, right, in that asset. So it's definitely an undertaking, but yeah, we've been able to work with Gauntlet since launch on that, and there's been a few assets we've wanted to list, but frankly, it's been too early, and on-chain liquidity hasn't been good enough, and so we've just opted not to. So we try to abide by that as strictly as we can.
Right. And I guess like in terms of like assets that you guys have your eye on, like what are some examples that you guys see that you're really keen to onboard? I think obviously there's a lot of liquidity in some of these LRTs now.
Mm-hmm.
Some exotic type things like Pendle PT assets, stuff like that. But like what do you guys think users want, and ultimately there's appetite to onboard for Synonym?
Yeah, so I mean, the Pendle assets have definitely been at the top of our list for a while, working out
Mhm.
exactly how we want to do that, given the expiries that'll exist on those vaults. Although we
Mhm.
are seeing there's a number of teams out there that are basically building auto compounding, auto rolling,
Yep.
kind of persistent Pendle PT wrappers. So that could be an interesting solution to that. But we've got our eye. We are looking at listing different Athena stables, so they're USDE from different chains. We've seen a lot of demand for that. And then after getting those assets up, we probably want to list another one of the big LRTs. We've already got EtherFi and Renzo up. And then, the big crown jewel thereafter is Sol once we get our Solana deployment up. So that covers, I think, the bulk of the near term asset roadmap. But if you've got something that you really, really want to borrow against, be sure to drop it in our Discord. There's been a few users who have actually been key drivers behind getting asset listing decisions going, and they've got what they wanted. So Snow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you guys are on the right path too with with the Bitcoin, the Bitcoin integrations that you guys have made, and obviously there's a lot of talk about, Bitcoin restaking,
Mhm.
coming down the pipeline. So I think that's going to be another huge one, to kind of focus on for money markets that are able to move quickly and kind of nimbly, which, it seems like you guys are kind of focused on serving that and being that. So it's great to see. Yeah, it's great to see. I always wonder, especially, when I get the opportunity to talk to somebody that's building one of these markets, it's just because from a user perspective, everyone's like, oh, onboard everything. We want, I
Yeah.
don't know, I want my, I don't know, well, my LPs from Sushi on there as soon as possible, or whatever it may be. Talking about LPs, for example, you guys already have like some of the GM tokens, as I mentioned, on there. Like, what are some of the difficulties of integrating like LP tokens from various dexes? Maybe touch on that a little bit and how you guys thought about
Mhm.
maybe targeting the GMX LPs first and foremost.
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest challenges come down to Oracle availability and integration for the token, and then how difficult it would be for any given liquidator to liquidate, unwind, and capture a profit on that asset. LP tokens introduce some additional steps and complexities that we don't think are always worth overcoming to list.
Right.
GM assets were one of those assets that just made sense. There's deep liquidity for all of them, pretty much. Oracle's support was robust across the board, and the GMX team was really supportive in helping us get them listed and kind of answering any questions we'd have on the technical side. There are LP tokens out there though where maybe DEX activity for the underlying LP token has slowed. We're not as confident, or Gauntlet might not be as confident in how easily it would be for an LP to unwind those positions quickly, especially with the cross chain element. You can't be waiting days to get something done if there's some long cross chain element or some lockup mechanic on these positions. So yeah, to date, GMX has been the one that's made the most sense, but we
Mhm.
are considering adding some additional ones in the future.
This episode is brought to you by Pendle. Pendle is the market leader in the DeFi yield sector, operating as a permissionless yield trading protocol, facilitating the tokenization and splitting of any yield bearing asset in DeFi, while creating an avenue for users to express their views on future yield or earn a fixed rate with their assets. Learn more at pendle.finance. Gotcha. Yeah, and I guess along the same ilk of like scaling, into different assets or different chains, touching on the chains for a minute. You mentioned, I think you guys have like a scroll integration live. You're looking at Solana. What are some of the things you guys are looking at though when you're thinking about onboarding or creating, I guess, the opportunity to lend and borrow from some of these L2s, and obviously L1s coming up, like Monad and Barachain are looming, I think. But like, what are you guys looking for before you guys make those deployments? Are you looking at like user demand, on the chain? Are you guys looking to be the first mover, on some of these chains?
Mhm.
How are you guys thinking about these things? Because I think it's very there's so much, there's like too many options, right? There's too many
Yeah,
options in the market, so you have to decide like what's going to be worth our time. So how are you guys thinking about that?
great question. I would say we generally look at user demand and speed of TVL growth within the chain. There's also some nice to haves, like deep stablecoin liquidity on a given chain is
Mhm.
great. There might be a chain that looks like it's growing a ton, but maybe a lot of that deposit value is just propped up by, gov tokens of
Yeah.
previous first movers or something like that. We generally want to see not just TVL growth, but the quality of that underlying TVL to be quite high. A lot of stables, a lot of ETH. LRTs are good too for us. That generally shows that the kind of the aggressive type of user and cross-chain farmer are kind of active there. So that's definitely important for us. When it comes to the first mover element, I would definitely say that there might be instances where it could be nice for us to be a first mover. However, our requirements with Gauntlet and kind of security and liquidity thresholds kind of mean that it would be really hard for us to do that, just because we'd be taking on risks that we wouldn't see as fair to the protocol in doing that. Although, sometimes the growth payoff could be attractive. We still probably wouldn't do that often or at all. And then the other element, which is starting to become increasingly important to us as we evaluate, chains after our Solana launch, which is our upcoming big one. Chains like Monad or Bear Chain is just kind of the amount of community interest around it. I think when it comes to chains like Monad or Bear Chain, they're in a league of their own when it comes to culture and excitement. So that's good to see. We don't want to just be listing, the thousandth clone of Blast or another chain like that for no reason.
Yeah.
We do need to see either quality TVL or quality community, or ideally both.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I mean, those are those are definitely things I would be thinking about if I were in your position as well, because it's tough, right? Like I think it's easier maybe with like a Barachain or a Monad, because you can see like how good of a job they've done, I think, fostering their community, so you can be relatively sure that deploying there early, could be successful, right? But like, there's no guarantees at the end of the day. So I like the fact that Synonym's flexible though. Like I'm surprised to see Scroll already on the app, to be honest with you, right? Because it's not like a ton, of activity on Scroll. I think it's growing, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I think being able as a user to like take advantage of, I don't know if a new chain has come out and they're, I don't know, maybe they're deploying another points Ponzi, but I want to go take advantage of that, right, and farm that. Being able to come to something like Synonym and just borrow against my assets, get some capital over there and then start farming is very attractive, right? Especially as we move forward, because I think even though people are getting burned a little bit by points, I don't think it's going away. And obviously people will come out with more and more, sophisticated type, bootstrapping methods as well. But being able to like take advantage of that without having to sell your assets, right? Or maybe you don't want to, go through that whole headache of bridging yourself and then, borrowing natively on that chain. So I think Synonym's well positioned to kind of take advantage, as these things continue to come out. Um, on the tokenomics side, I always like to talk about the token, if the protocol does have a token, especially for a money market, right? Like we've seen, obviously, money markets with their own token. We've seen some that don't have a token. Like, what do you guys think is the optimal role for the token within your ecosystem? And maybe describe like the utility that you guys have created for it.
Yeah, so for us, it just comes down to fees and governance. From day one of launch, we have distributed fees derived from the operation of our money market back to token holders. We pay those fees to token holders directly in ETH, and they can maximize their earnings by locking into VL Syno, which is basically an enhanced longer term lock that gets you a larger share of fees from the underlying operations. The longer you lock, the longer the threshold that you choose, the more you'll get. And when it comes to the governance side of the equation, we've already had a few proposals get posted and voted on and approved, and we want to gradually push even more power to token holders and to the governance body as time goes on. That's something that's on our immediate to-do list, and basically want to have this thing be entirely community directed and run. I think that when it comes to, we'll call it the fee switch discussion as a nod to Uniswap, but when it comes to that, I think it's important to balance the kind of the growth aspirations of the protocol with the returning fees to users. I mean, if we flip the fee switch as hard as we can in a lot of situations, those fees have to move from somewhere. And if you take them more from LPs, that could hurt their intentions to actually LP with your protocol and grow it. You're favoring one group at the expense of another. So we've intentionally left room to kind of gradually adjust that split within our governance and within our available fee structure. And we're excited to see how that plays out. But I think always important to remember the growth needs of the protocol and not drive your growth and partnerships team completely insane. So that's where we are now, and we've made the decision to have that fee system available since day one. I think that anyone who's interested in the token generally wants to see that. And, at least the feedback we've gotten is that they've been happy that that's been available so early. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you hit it on the head too. It is a balance, like everything I think that we've talked about in this discussion. Is there is a balance, and it's funny because I think there are some parties that really, really want, Uniswap to turn on the fee switch, for example, but I don't think that they think about the other side of the coin on like what might actually happen if they do that, too aggressively. Obviously, I think, even recently, I think Aave has been talking about that as well, right? About kind of turning on the fee switch, and directing, more fees to Aave stakers. But again, at the expense of what party, right? So it's always interesting to hear, I guess, the builders, perspective on that and how you guys are thinking about that. I wanted to circle back to something that we were talking about earlier, and I think you mentioned it with regards to Wormhole, but with security, right? What kind of fallback measures do you guys have in place, or do you have any? Like, let's say something happens with Wormhole, is there a fallback methodology you guys have in place to like make sure that like liquidation still trigger, or things still happen within the protocol, like if Wormhole were to have an issue? Because that's one thing I think about a lot when it comes to some of the cross-chain architecture out there, with Layer
Mm-hmm.
Zero and Wormhole, any of them, right? If you're solely dependent on one of them and they go down, that's a point of centralization that, maybe could be a problem. So how do you guys think about that?
Yeah. So when it comes to something like that happening, generally the hub and spoke architecture does have its advantage because
Mm,
in a absolute worst case scenario, right? In theory, we could push an upgrade to the hub that would allow us to manage the liquidations in a way that we could hot swap to another messaging provider.
mm,
This contrasts with the point to point model where you would essentially need to somehow kind of take them all back under emergency control and then manage it that way versus having all state and all balance tracking in a single point on our hub. Makes that a lot easier. So that is something that is like a absolute worst case scenario. Something like Wormhole is entirely shut down, or something like that was to happen, we'd be able to control it that way. Right now, we're working on building up an insurance fund out of fees. I mean, we're still a very young protocol. It's still early. We're not going to have the
yep.
same kind of deep insurance lining that like an Aave would have, but that is something we are working towards. And then when it comes to avoiding those things in the future, we do want to build in multi-messaging support eventually as a fallback. Right now, we have multi-Oracle support to kind of work through in those bad case scenarios. We support Pyth, Chainlink, and
Mm.
Redstone on most of our markets. So we've got that in place. But yeah, I mean, to your point, messaging fallbacks are next. And then the hub does help us in a worst case scenario.
Awesome. So we're coming up on probably a good time to start wrapping up. But before we do that, I do want to hear from you on maybe the most exciting thing that you think is coming up for Synonym on the roadmap that users should be excited about as well. I think you already mentioned it, but maybe
Yeah,
touch on
it's
it,
my,
and
my favorite part of the call.
yeah, maybe touch on that, and then tell us why. At the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the most exciting thing coming up is coming very soon, right around the end of summer. And it is the combination of optimistic finality and our Solana launch. So optimistic finality, which I mentioned earlier on its own, basically reduces the wait time in cross-chain borrow lend transactions to essentially nothing, up to a certain dollar amount, which we feel covers 95% of user transactions on the platform. And then obviously our Solana deployment. So having our Solana deployment live will basically be a huge unlock. The days of needing to use a full token bridge or needing to go through a centralized exchange to get your assets and SOL onto Solana so that you can ape whatever is going on over there are going to be over. You'll be able to just remotely borrow against your LRTs into USDC on Solana in any kind of collateral combination that you want and get active there, all on native SVM. So I think when you pair that with basically zero wait time, you get a really compelling upgrade in UX and what you're actually capable of. And this is something that just me as a standalone independent user has wanted for a very long time. So I'm really excited about that. And we're just putting kind of the final touches on it now. It's going through audit. The custom infra that is required to make that happen has already been built. So it's just a matter of time now, but I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I can't wait to ape meme coins using Synonym. So I'm
Yeah,
very
that's what
very
I love to
excited
hear.
about. Man, well it's been awesome. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on. I know it's tough to carve out time sometimes for things other than looking at code or looking at partnerships and pushing the protocol forward. So we really appreciate your time. Um, for anybody listening, obviously check out our show notes, and we will link you to where you can find Beachball, where you can find Synonym, and obviously, look out for some content that we've got coming up on Synonym on Revelo Intel as well. That should be very useful for you to simplify understanding Synonym and where they're going and how you can take advantage of it. So, thanks everybody. Thanks Beachball, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.